Last week, we covered a few of the larger mysteries from Fatal Frame 2 that still haven't been definitively answered over the years, not even with the remake. But this game is still full of mysteries to explore, so this week, let's just head right on in and look at a few more and see what we can uncover. 1. Where exactly is Minakami Village? This question intrigues me because it seems to be one of the things that was vaguely retconned over the years, but also maybe not really. Let's explain. The Himuro Mansion from Fatal Frame 1 was located in the Mutsu region of Japan, which is modern-day Tohoku. In particular, the Mutsu region covered the current prefectures of Fukushima, Miyagi, Iwate, Aomori, and a little of Akita. News Clipping 3 in particular tells us the mansion is located in the southern part of the prefecture. This is important to note because that news clipping is rather modern and from when the area split into prefectures. Now, the Kuze Shrine from Fatal Frame 3 is located not too far from the Himuro Mansion. No, we don't know how close they are, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not like they're opposite sides of the country. They're decently close and in the same general area. After all, Mafuyu, Yu, and Kei are all close friends. And this is during the late 1980s, so they all live pretty close to each other. Mafuyu and Kei literally worked together for a while, and Miku even moves in with Rei, Yu's fiancé, after losing Mafuyu to the Himuro Mansion. Interestingly, a book in Yu's room speaks of some interesting Buddhist statues from a derelict temple in the Akita Mountains that looks just like the Buddhist statues in the Kuze Shrine. Let's also keep this in mind. Fatal Frame 4 is somewhat of an anomaly in that it takes place far from Japan's northeast, so I won't include it here. But then we have Mount Hikami from Fatal Frame 5, which is also said to be located not too far from the events of Fatal Frame 1 and 3. In fact, Fatal Frame 2 Remake directly addresses Mount Hikami's location, mentioning in the exposure filter memo that these mechanics resemble a practice known as phantom exposés, which are performed by shadow readers, people who unearth similar items concealed by supernatural means within part of the Tohoku region. This was the core mechanic of Fatal Frame 5, and a skill passed down in that particular area. Now, Mount Hikami is also vaguely based off Mount Osore, which we can find in Aomori. Using all of this information, we can assume that the events of Fatal Frame 1, 3, and 5 all probably take place somewhere around the borders of modern-day Akita and Aomori prefectures. The Himuro Mansion being around the south of Aomori Prefecture, the Kuze Shrine in the mountains of North Akita, and Mount Hikami being somewhere nearby in Aomori as well. All of our characters are concentrated in this one area over the years and decades and even centuries. But does that include Minakami? The evidence seems to suggest that initially, Minakami was not intended to be here, but rather in the middle of Japan, but was then perhaps moved to fit in with the rest of the series. Or they just never mentioned where it was again because it's kinda confusing. Once again, going back to Makabe's notes from the Fatal Frame 2 guidebook, he talks about a village in the Hokudiku area that has a hellgate that very much resembles the one we see on Misono Hill in Minakami. Obviously, these cannot be the same village, as Makabe doesn't visit Minakami until well after this. But he does wonder if the two villages are related by blood. Remember, we're heading back to the late 1800s or so here. These people aren't exactly casually walking across the country for fun. This would, at the very least, suggest these two villages are decently close. This idea is further supported by Fatal Frame 3, of all places, in the twin deification file you can find in Miku's room. Although it's omitted from the English translation, the Japanese specifically notes that in the Chubu region, which corresponds to the old Hokuriku area, some of the villages in the mountain region practice a folk religion rite that deifies twins born in the village as priestesses. This twins ceremony involves twins reaching a certain age, usually 15, dressing in white and being joined by a red cord. This cord represents the twins being one person, and the local belief is that when the twins become one, they have the power of the gods. This is straight up what happens in Minakami. And in Yu's notes from the Fatal Frame 3 guidebook, he also notes this same festival still happens in the mountains of the Chubu region to this day. So, although we're not told exactly where Minakami is, it seems clear they originally wanted us to at least think it was somewhere in the Chubu region. This doesn't necessarily conflict with Kei, Mio and Mayu's uncle, living and working in the Tohoku area either, while his sister, the twins' mother, initially raised them only a short distance from Minakami. After all, Fatal Frame 3 also tells us that Shizu, their mother, moved them to Tokyo after their father disappeared, and they were just visiting Minakami during their summer vacation. So, Kei could have very easily have moved in the other direction, the northeast, for work too. And even though we're told he looked after Mio after her mother was hospitalized, again, this doesn't mean Minakami or even Tokyo has to be nearby. Shizu is in no state to care for her deeply traumatized daughter while she's in the hospital. So it's possible she sent her far northeast to stay with her uncle instead. But here's where things get confusing. The majority of the Fatal Frame series takes place in the Tohoku region. In particular, that area that's close to the Aomori and Akita borders, if game files are to be believed. And we know that Yae, the only person to escape from Minakami, ended up living at the Himuro mansion as an adult too. She married Ryozo at some point after leaving Minakami, they had a child, and while Ryozo was visiting the 5 god shrines near the Himuro mansion, he developed an interest in the potential gate to hell that lurked beneath it. This led to them eventually moving in, so he could continue his research there, while also keeping an eye on his sick wife, meaning they very likely already lived nearby, as it wasn't exactly easy to travel long distances at the time with a sickly woman. Dr. Aso was also born and raised in this same area of the northeast, and most of his descendants are from there too. Again, setting Fatal Frame 4 aside, and that game does note he travelled there specifically to research their Kagura, which only takes place there. And one of Dr. Aso's descendants was Misao, Mio and Mayu's father, who lived near Minakami. We also know that the urban legend of Sugisawa, which was supposedly also located in Aomori, was a huge inspiration for Minakami as well. It's also interesting to note that self-mummification, a ritual that monks underwent to mummify themselves while alive, which is the form Kurosawa Ryokan takes on as a ghost, is something that was mostly practiced in what is now Yamagata Prefecture, in, you guessed it, Japan's northeast. With all of this in mind, it just makes sense to also keep Minakami in that same general area, right? Then we also don't have to have people travelling all around the country constantly, especially in a time where that sort of travel honestly took quite some time. So while we're never definitively told where Minakami Village actually was, not even in the remake, it seems likely they intended for it to be located in the Chubu area originally, but with later games taking place almost exclusively in the same area of the Northeast, it just makes sense to have Minakami be there as well, right? Ultimately, this one remains a mystery though. So, what do you guys think? 2. What does the warped photo of Sae mean? Around the beginning of Chapter 4, we get a photo of Kurosawa Yae and Sae that comes with the first part of their butterfly diary. In the photo, we can see Sae's face is warped, and in the diary, Sae mentions that Makabe used a special box to take the photo, and that, "My face turned out a little weird, in my opinion, but I still had a fun time." Now, this statement varies depending on which version of the game you're playing, but the Japanese across all versions notes that, "My face looks a little weird, but ii omoide ni natta." Basically, it makes for a nice memory. Oddly, she doesn't seem terribly disturbed by this. Now, when we first see this photo, obviously, it's meant to set the mood, if you will. We're supposed to think of Sae as this creepy, evil ghost, and see, even when she was alive, her face was warped and twisted. It also immediately brings to mind the movie Ring, where a photo was taken of several characters who had their faces warped just like this, and a week later, they all ended up dying. This cultural knowledge is supposed to make you think of the same thing here. Sae's face is warped, therefore she is doomed and going to die. But when we stop to think about it, what does it actually mean? What are the implications of this creepy photo? Does this mean that the Kurosawa twins' ritual was also destined to fail, and nothing they did mattered? How does the camera obscura manage to pick this up before the ritual has even taken place? First things first, this isn't the only photo taken from before Minakami fell. We also have a photo of the Tachibana twins with their younger sister, Chitose. Of course, it should be noted that this photo wasn't taken with the camera obscura, as this happened before Makabe ever learnt of the village. We don't know who took this photo, but it exists, and none of their faces are warped. This doesn't necessarily mean anything because, again, this wasn't taken with a camera obscura. We know that the camera obscura is able to capture the other side. It possesses strange powers to cleanse and even reveal the unseen. So, when Makabe takes this picture of Sae, and her face is warped, what does this actually mean in the game world? We sadly don't have any other photos of twins taken with the camera obscura to compare it to. Yes, you could argue that we're freely able to take pictures of Mayu all game, and it doesn't do anything. But again, this isn't technically canon. Unless we see it in a cutscene, these are just player actions. If we use our cultural knowledge of Ring, which this is clearly trying to make you think of, then it means that Sae was doomed when this photo was taken. It's interesting to note that the camera obscura is apparently able to pick up on that, and that alone presents some pretty interesting in-universe implications. It does, in a way, indicate that fate is something that exists in the Fatal Frame universe, that it's connected to the other side, and it's something that can be visually captured if you have the right tools. But there's another interesting theory that doesn't need us to rely on the notion of fate that can be captured by a supernatural camera, but instead ties into the game's idea that twins are actually two halves of the same whole. The entire reason this storyline exists is because in Minakami Village, they believe that when twins are conceived, a single soul is split across the two bodies. There's something inherently divine in this act, something only a divine spirit can do, and by going through the Crimson Sacrifice ritual, they are able to unite those two halves into one sacred whole again. It's a terribly painful, heart-rending act, and it's the emotions, trauma, and powerful energy that is born from this act that is able to quell the other side. So, with that in mind, is the camera obscura perhaps visually, for the first time ever, showing what this looks like? Saya is considered the younger, lesser, or second twin, the one who must die so they can become whole again. Is the camera obscura able to notice a somewhat deficiency in her soul, if you will, because of its ability to see and even visualize the other side? I personally like this answer a lot more because it doesn't rely on fate, and it ties directly into the story the game is trying to tell us. But what do you guys think of this one? And that is 2 more of the still lingering mysteries from Fatal Frame 2. Again, I will be making some more of these videos, so if there are other mysteries I still haven't looked at that you'd like me to explore, let me know in the comments below. But until then, let me know what you thought about these ones, and I'll see you again next time.